In the spring of 1944, somewhere in occupied Poland, a group of Allied airmen stood on a patch of dirt surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, and armed German soldiers. They were prisoners of war inside Stalag Luft III, one of the most heavily guarded camps the Luftwaffe ever built. And on that particular afternoon, these men were doing something their captors never expected. They were playing golf. Not an imaginary version of it, not a joke. They had built a 6-hole golf course in the middle of the camp, complete with sand traps, bunkers, and putting greens. The clubs were forged from melted cigarette foil poured into homemade molds, fitted onto carved strips of wood with scraps of cloth wrapped around the grip. The balls were carved from pine, wound with wool and cotton, then stitched together with leather cut from old shoes. And the 6th hole ran directly over the roof of a latrine building, so anyone walking in or out had to keep their head down to avoid a low-flying shot. That sounds like something out of a comedy, but it was real. And it was only one small piece of a massive underground culture of entertainment, creativity, and resistance that prisoners of war built across every major conflict of the 20th century. Most people know the stories about tunnels and escapes. What almost nobody talks about is what happened in the hours between those escape attempts. Because what prisoners did with their downtime changed the course of wars, preserved the sanity of thousands of men, and, in some cases, created the cover stories that made the most famous escapes in history possible. To understand how deep this goes, you have to start with Stalag Luft III itself. The camp was built in the spring of 1942, about 130 miles southeast of Berlin, near the town of Sagan. The Germans put it in the middle of a pine forest, intentionally, because the sandy soil underneath the trees would make tunneling nearly impossible. The yellow sand would be immediately visible against the grey surface dirt if anyone tried to dig. The Luftwaffe designed this place to be escape-proof. They packed it with over 10,000 Allied airmen, mostly British and American pilots, and aircrew who had been shot down over Europe. But the Germans made a calculation that backfired completely. They allowed the Red Cross to deliver care packages. They allowed humanitarian organizations to send games, books, and recreational supplies. The logic was simple. Keep the prisoners entertained, and they would be too distracted to cause trouble. Keep their minds on chess and cards and theater, and they would stop thinking about escape. It was a reasonable assumption. It was also catastrophically wrong. The prisoners did not just accept those care packages. They weaponized them. Every compound in the camp had its own theater, and shows were performed twice a week. These were not half-hearted skits thrown together by bored soldiers. The productions featured professional quality costumes, wigs, and makeup. A prisoner named Rupert Davies, who later became famous for playing Inspector Maigret on British television, performed in plays at the camp theatre. Peter Butterworth, who went on to star in the Carry On films, was also a prisoner there. He spent part of his time doing gymnastics routines over a tunnel entrance as part of a cover for the legendary wooden horse escape. The camp even had its own radio station, which the prisoners named KRGY, short for Kriegsgefangener, the German word for prisoner of war. They broadcast news and music through the camp's amplifier system, and they published 2 newspapers, The Circuit and the Kriegi Times, which came out 4 times a week, and included theater reviews and sports scores. Sports were everywhere. The Americans organized full leagues in basketball, softball, boxing, touch football, volleyball, table tennis, and fencing. They had athletic fields and volleyball courts in every compound. A small fire pool, roughly 20 feet by 22 feet, doubled as a swimming hole on hot days. The softball games got so competitive that teams with names like Clare's Cardinals and Noble's Indians drew huge crowds from prisoners of every nationality. Terms like strikeout and shortstop became common slang among British and Polish prisoners who had never heard of the sport before arriving at the camp. The place had the best organized recreational program of any American POW camp in Germany, according to official records. And all of it, every game, every concert, every newspaper, was doing double duty. Because while the guards watched the theater and the softball games, entire teams of prisoners were running one of the most complex escape operations in military history directly underneath them. The entertainment was the cover, The softball fields gave lookouts a reason to stand in specific positions. The theater rehearsals created noise that masked the sounds of digging. The concerts pulled guards away from their posts. Recreation was not a distraction from escape. It was the engine that made escape possible. But Stalag Luft III was not the only camp running this kind of operation. Over at Colditz Castle, a medieval fortress in eastern Germany that the Nazis designated as their highest security prison camp, prisoners took the concept even further. Colditz held the worst troublemakers from camps all over Europe, officers who had already tried to escape from other facilities. The Germans believed the castle was virtually inescapable. Over 700 rooms, 90-foot-high walls, more than 200 guards, 18 sentry posts, barbed wire, floodlights, and code words that changed on a regular rotation. The prisoners responded by building one of the most creatively defiant communities of the entire war. Polish prisoners organized the first Camp Olympics. Men from multiple nations formed orchestras, put on revues, performed Shakespeare, and brewed their own moonshine from whatever ingredients they could steal or trade for. They painted a giant game of snakes and ladders on the floor of one barracks, with a forked-tongued Mussolini at the head of the longest snake. When the Italian guards found it and painted over it, the prisoners posted a sentry to make sure nobody repainted it. So the guards posted their own sentry, a standoff over a floor painting. But the entertainment at Colditz was covering something much bigger than tunnels. In the final year of the war, British prisoners constructed a full-size glider in a hidden attic above the chapel. They called it the Colditz Cock. It had a wingspan of over 9 meters. The skin was made from bed sheets stretched over a frame of floorboards, sealed together with porridge paste. The design came from a smuggled book on aeronautical engineering by a man named Latimer Needham, and 2 prisoners, Lieutenant Tony Rolt and Flight Lieutenant Bill Goldfinch, led the entire project. The glider was hidden behind a false wall. The launch plan involved a bathtub filled with concrete attached to a pulley system on the roof that would catapult the glider off the castle. And the entire time this thing was being assembled, the noise of construction was covered by orchestra rehearsals in the rooms below. The musicians played louder during hammering. They stopped during guard patrols, which signaled the builders to go quiet. Music was the alarm system. The Colditz Cock never flew. The camp was liberated in 1945 before the launch could happen. But after the war, a replica was built from Goldfinch's original drawings and test flown by Channel 4 television. It worked. And Colditz produced escape attempts just as creative as the entertainment that covered them. Over 300 escape attempts were made from the castle during the 5 years it served as a POW camp, and about 30 of them succeeded. The prisoners called successful escapes home runs. One of the most surreal involved a British officer named John Beaumont, who played French horn in the prison orchestra. Outside the castle walls, there was an old garbage heap filled with cans, cardboard, sticks, rags, and other junk. The Germans never gave it a second thought. One day, Beaumont was reported missing during a head count. Guards searched outside the castle and found a thin, fair-haired man trotting along a path in broad daylight. Tucked under his arm was a blanket completely covered in sewn-on cans, cardboard, sticks, and rags, designed to look exactly like a piece of the rubbish heap. He had hidden himself inside the garbage, waited for his moment, and walked away carrying his camouflage under his arm. The French horn player had escaped in a blanket made of trash. Another British officer, Dominic Bruce, made a record 17 escape attempts from various camps, including several from Colditz. On one attempt, he hid himself inside a wooden tea chest, had it carried to a storeroom on the 3rd floor, then cut himself out with a file, rappelled down the side of the castle on a 40-foot rope made from bed sheets, and before he left, scrawled a message on the storeroom wall that read, "The air in Colditz no longer pleases me. See you later." He was recaptured a week later trying to stow away on a Swedish ship. Now, while these European camps had their theatre and sports and secret gliders, British intelligence was running a parallel operation that turned recreational supplies into escape kits on an industrial scale. And the centerpiece of this operation was a board game that almost everyone has played at some point in their life: Monopoly. The plan came from a man named Christopher Clayton Hutton, an intelligence officer working for MI9, the branch of British military intelligence responsible for helping prisoners escape. Hutton had a personal obsession with escape. He had once challenged Harry Houdini to break out of a challenge, so the military figured he was the right man for the job. His problem was figuring out how to get tools into the camps without the Germans catching on. The Red Cross delivered care packages, but MI9 refused to compromise the Red Cross by hiding contraband in their shipments. So Hutton turned to the John Waddington Company in Leeds, which happened to be the British manufacturer of Monopoly and which also happened to have the technology to print on silk. The plan was simple and brilliant. Waddington produced special Monopoly sets. The boards, which were normally about 1/8 of an inch thick, were hollowed out and fitted with precision compartments. Inside those compartments, they hid silk escape maps, tiny compasses, metal files, and a compass so small it could fit under a game piece. Under the stacks of Monopoly money, they tucked real French, German, and Italian banknotes, with a single piece of Monopoly money on the top and bottom of each pile to complete the disguise. Every altered set was marked with a tiny red dot on the free parking space, so prisoners would know which games to crack open. And the maps were coded too. A period after Marylebone Station meant the board contained a map of Italy. A period after Mayfair meant Germany, Norway, and Sweden. A period after free parking pointed to northern France. To get these sets into the camps, MI9 created fake charities with names like the Prisoners' Leisure Hours Fund and the Licensed Victualers Sports Association, operating out of return addresses on bombed-out streets that nobody could visit. They sent coded letters from fictional parents, instructing prisoners to look for the marked games. Before RAF aircrews went on missions over Europe, they were briefed to watch for Monopoly sets in the care packages if they were captured. The prison escape committees would destroy each set after extracting the tools, so the guards would never figure out the system. The Germans never did. The operation was kept secret for decades after the war, and according to Waddington, the rigged Monopoly boards helped an unknown number of Allied prisoners escape to neutral countries and eventually make it home. Think about that for a second. A board game, one of the most innocent-looking objects in the world, and it was a covert military operation with silk maps and real currency and codes embedded in the punctuation of property names. The phrase "get out of jail free" was never more literal, and Monopoly was not the only recreational item that MI9 turned into a weapon. When the British learned that prisoners in the camps had formed entertainment committees and were running their own theatres, orchestras, and music programs, they recruited EMI, the record company, to help with an operation called Smash Hit. The plan involved hiding silk escape maps inside gramophone records that the Red Cross sent to the camps as part of the musical entertainment supplies. The records had to be physically broken to get the maps out, which is how the operation got its name. The Germans allowed these shipments because they believed music kept prisoners docile. They were partially right. Music did keep the prisoners occupied. It also delivered the exact maps those prisoners needed to plan routes to neutral territory. The entire system depended on coded messages smuggled out of the camps through letters sent to fictional addresses that MI9 had set up. The prisoners would write to these fake charities, confirming what they had received, and MI9 would adjust future shipments based on what each camp needed. It was a supply chain of escape tools hidden inside a supply chain of entertainment, and the Germans never cracked it. But entertainment as a survival tool was not limited to the European theatre. Halfway around the world, in the brutal prisoner of war camps run by the Japanese in Southeast Asia, prisoners were finding ways to keep their minds alive under conditions far worse than anything at Stalag Luft III or Colditz. At Changi prison in Singapore, after the fall of the city to the Japanese in February of 1942, Allied prisoners of war established something that became known as Changi University. It was an entire educational system, organized and run by the prisoners themselves, with courses in general education, business training, languages, engineering, science, agriculture, law, and medicine. The classes were taught by prisoners who had been professors, lawyers, doctors, and engineers in civilian life. Art classes were led by an Australian named Murray Griffin, whose paintings of life inside the camp are now held at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. The university was open to prisoners of all nationalities, and some of the coursework was rigorous enough to approximate university-level study. This was happening under the eyes of guards who could beat or execute prisoners for minor infractions. The Japanese did not operate under the same Geneva Convention standards as the Germans, and conditions at Changi were harsh. Rations were thin, tropical diseases were rampant. Punishment for disobedience could come without warning. But the prisoners built something remarkable in the middle of all of it. The university gave men a reason to think beyond their immediate suffering. A soldier who spent his morning on a work detail and his afternoon studying contract law or learning Malay was not simply passing time. He was investing in a version of himself that would exist after the camp. He was making a bet on survival, and many of those bets paid off. After the war, former Changi prisoners used the qualifications and knowledge they had gained inside the camp to build careers, start businesses, and enter professions they might never have considered before being captured. The university did not just preserve their mental health during captivity, it changed the trajectory of their lives after it. And then there were the radios. In multiple Japanese POW camps, prisoners secretly constructed working radio receivers from the most basic materials imaginable. At one camp in the Philippines, a group of American prisoners built a radio receiver small enough to hide inside a water canteen. The components were scavenged and improvised from almost nothing. The circuit was built entirely from memory because the men had arrived in camp with nothing but their dog tags and the clothes on their backs. There were no reference books, no schematics, no diagrams. Everything they knew about radio construction was stored in their heads from training they had received months or years earlier. They fired up their homemade set and heard the chimes of Big Ben ringing through the earphone. It was the first real news they had received about the progress of the war. The guards searched constantly for hidden radios, and the penalties for being caught with one were severe, often fatal. But no one gave up the canteen radio. It survived until the camp was liberated by American and Filipino resistance forces on January 30th, 1945. The original was lost in the chaos of the raid, but replicas have since been built by amateur radio enthusiasts and have won homebrew radio contests. 2 decades later, during the Vietnam War, a prisoner named Richard Lucas repeated the feat under conditions just as harsh. Lucas built a foxhole radio headset from a core of nails wrapped with wax-insulated wire, set inside a bamboo resonator with a tin can lid acting as a diaphragm. He reported that it worked well enough to pick up several broadcast stations, though he noted the headset would have performed better with a magnet to bias the coil. Like the canteen radio builders before him, Lucas constructed the entire device from memory. No manual, no parts catalog. Just the knowledge stored in his head from the training he had received before being shot down and captured. These were engineers working with scraps, under threat of death, building functioning electronics from nails and tin cans. And in every case, the radios did more than deliver news. They delivered hope, knowing that the outside world still existed, that the war was progressing, that liberation might be coming, gave prisoners a reason to endure one more day. That was the real frequency they were tuning into. In Vietnam, entertainment took on a completely different form because the conditions were completely different. At Hoa Lo prison in Hanoi, the facility that American prisoners of war sarcastically nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton, men were held in solitary confinement for months and years at a time. There were no theaters, no sports leagues, no orchestras. Many prisoners never saw another American face for weeks. The Vietnamese guards used torture, starvation, and isolation as deliberate tools of control. Under those conditions, entertainment could not be organized in any traditional sense. So the prisoners invented something new. In June of 1965, Air Force Captain Carlisle Harris, who had been shot down over North Vietnam in April of that year, remembered an obscure communication technique he had learned at an Air Force survival school before deploying. It was called the TAP code, and it was based on a 5x5 grid of the alphabet. Each letter could be communicated by 2 sets of taps on a wall. The first set of taps told you the row. The second set told you the column. Harris taught the code to 3 fellow prisoners, Lieutenant Philip Butler, Lieutenant Robert Peel, and Lieutenant Commander Robert Shoemaker. From there, it spread to every new arrival. The tap code became the social life, the entertainment, and the command structure of the Hanoi Hilton all at once. Prisoners tapped messages of encouragement to men in neighboring cells they had never seen. They passed along intelligence about which guards were the most dangerous and what to expect during interrogations. They coordinated resistance strategies. They maintained a military chain of command through the walls, and they told jokes. A kick on the wall was the signal for laughter. Air Force pilot Ron Bliss later described the prison as sounding like a den of runaway woodpeckers. One of the most senior prisoners, Navy Commander James Stockdale, used the tap code to distribute a resistance policy he called Back US. The letters stood for specific rules: do not bow in public, stay off the air, meaning refuse to make recordings or broadcasts, do not kiss the Vietnamese goodbye, meaning show no gratitude upon release. And the final 2 letters, US, stood for unity over self. That policy gave hundreds of men a moral compass to navigate years of captivity, and it was transmitted entirely through taps on concrete walls. The most famous act of resistance at the Hanoi Hilton combined entertainment and defiance in a way that stunned the world. In May of 1966, Navy pilot Jeremiah Denton was brought before television cameras to film an anti-war propaganda statement for the North Vietnamese. His captors believed they had broken him, but while he spoke the scripted words, Denton blinked the letters T, O, R, T, U, R, E in Morse code with his eyelids. It was the first confirmed evidence that American POWs in North Vietnam were being tortured. United States officials saw the tape, decoded the blinks, and Denton was later awarded the Navy Cross for bravery. There is a thread that runs through all of these stories, from the golf course at Stalag Luft III to the tapping walls of the Hanoi Hilton. Captivity strips away almost everything: freedom, autonomy, safety, dignity. But the one thing no guard and no prison and no amount of barbed wire could strip away was the human need to create, to connect, to play, and to resist through the act of staying mentally alive. Entertainment in a POW camp was never just a way to pass the time. It was how men preserved their identity when everything else had been taken from them. It was how they organized. It was how they kept secrets. And in many cases, it was how they fought back. The Geneva Convention of 1929 actually recognized this. Article 17 specifically required detaining powers to encourage intellectual and sporting pursuits among prisoners of war. The framers of that document understood something fundamental about human beings in captivity. A prisoner with nothing to do and nothing to think about becomes dangerous, unpredictable, and broken. A prisoner who has a reason to get up in the morning, whether it is a softball game, a theater rehearsal, a university lecture, or a message tapped through a wall, retains something that captivity alone cannot destroy. After the war, many former POWs said something unexpected. They said their time in captivity, as terrible as it was, gave them a clearer sense of values, a stronger connection to the people around them, and a resilience they did not know they had. The men who participated in organized entertainment and education programs consistently came out of captivity in better psychological shape than those who had been isolated. The ones who tapped on walls for years came home and said the code saved their lives. The ones who played softball in the dirt at Stalag Luft III said those games kept them sane. The world remembers the Great Escape, the tunnels, the gliders, the breakouts. But behind every one of those legendary operations was something quieter and just as important. A man carving a golf ball from a piece of pine. A prisoner conducting an orchestra to cover the sound of hammering. A pilot tapping a joke through a prison wall and waiting for the kick that meant someone on the other side was laughing. If you found this video interesting, hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us which story surprised you the most. We cover hidden history like this every week, and there is a lot more where this came from.